Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel where we break down cybersecurity in simple terms, one concept at one time. This video is the part 1 of Clause 6 of ISO 27001 series. Before we dive into Clause 6, it is very important for us to understand risk. What is risk? What is the risk life cycle? And how do organizations handle these risks? Organizations used risk register to handle and maintain the risk. We'll understand the details of it in this video. Today's agenda is understanding risk life cycle, and what is risk register. Clause 6 is all about risk, how an organization handles and manages its risk. So let's first understand what exactly is risk and what is risk life cycle. Risk is nothing but a potential loss or a damage that an organization can face in case of any vulnerability gets exploited by an attacker. Risk is defined by a very simple formula, which is threat into vulnerability. Let's understand what is threat and what is vulnerability with an example. Say you have a database, and this database has a very weak password policy enabled in it. If an attacker or a hacker exploits this database using this vulnerability, which is the weak password, then there is a loss. Maybe it's a data loss, a data theft, reputational loss, maybe regulatory fines. So these are the risks that your organization will face in case your database is being exploited. So in this given example, weak password is your vulnerability, attacker is the threat to the database, and risk is nothing but the data loss or the data leakage or the fines that your organization will face in case the vulnerability is being exploited. So it's very important for you to identify the risks in your organization. How would you identify the risk in your organization? First of all, the organization should understand what could go wrong. Okay, in case there is, for example, in my example of this online food delivery app, if the business owners and the system owners must sit and analyze what might go wrong. Maybe a server can go down. Maybe a credit card fraud can happen. A data leakage can happen. So these are some of the risks that your organization can face. System administrators, the business owners, for everyone to sit and do a brainstorming session. This can help you in identifying the risk. Okay, so I can say that you can have a brainstorming session. Next is your vulnerability, and your pen test report can give you the details about the risks that are there in your environment. Sometimes your audits, your internal audits or your external audits can give you the information about the controls which are not in place and the controls which can help you strengthen the security system of your process or of your business. You can also check the historical incidents. Okay, you can just review the incidents and see what are the most common incidents that you have received, and are you well equipped to face those incidents in future. So yeah, incident review of the past, and then you can also do a threat modeling, okay, of your system or your process, which will reveal some of the most common vulnerabilities or the vulnerabilities in your organization. So this way you can identify the risk in your organization. Now, every risk, as I said, has a risk life cycle. First, you identify the risk and then you assess the risk. After which you will treat the risk, then you will monitor the risk, after which you will communicate the risk within your organization, and then you'll also have some process for improvements. Why do you think it is important to have a risk life cycle? Because a risk life cycle will give you a structured way to identify, assess, manage, and monitor the risk. Risks don't just end once you treat them. They will evolve over time, and hence it is important. In this world where everything is evolving, the process and technology are evolving, so your risks also will evolve. It's important for you to maintain the risk life cycle. The first step in risk life cycle is to identify a risk. Now, previously I had mentioned how to identify a risk. There are different methods of identifying risks. Should be identified based on the assets, based on the technology that you're using, the business processes, and all. Once the risk is identified, next is you have to assess the risk. How do you assess the risk? What is risk assessment? It is nothing but the likelihood of this risk getting substantialized and what is the impact of the risk, what is the impact it would cause when the risk is substantialized. Based on these two factors, you're going to assess the risk. In some of the companies, you give some rating to the likelihood and the impact, and based on which you will give a priority, you will define a priority to your risk. Defining a priority to a risk is very important because based on the priority of the risk, you will actually try to treat your risk. Okay, for example, in few of the companies, they give a rating of the risk from say 1 to 5, where 1 being lowest and 5 being the highest. And the impact also same. They would give a rating of 1 to 5, where 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest. So priority of the risk will be nothing but the likelihood into the impact. What is impact? Impact is the occurrence or the possibility of this risk of the risk getting substantialized. Okay, likelihood is nothing but the possibility of the risk getting substantialized, and impact is the amount of damage the risk can cause if it is substantialized. For example, let's take the database. If it has a weak password, then what is the likelihood of that database getting exploited? Say it's using a weak password, so I'll say the likelihood is 4, say 3. Okay, and then the impact it will cause a data leak, it will cause data, the impact of the password, the impact of the database exploitation might lead to data leakage, regulatory fines. So I'll say it is 4. In that case, I'll say my risk, my priority of the risk is 12. Sorry, the priority of the risk is 12. 3 into 4 is 12. So then what I would do in my organization is I would say, okay, see, the max of the likelihood is 5 and the max of priority is also 5, right? So 5 into 5 is 25, and 1 into 1, the least of likelihood is 1, the least impact value could be 1, so 1. So 1 into 1 is 1. So my priority will lie anywhere between 1 to 25, correct? The priority of my risk can be between 1 to 25. In that case, what I could do is, in my organization, I can define something like 25. If my value of priority is falling somewhere between 25 to 20, I would say it is a critical risk. If it is falling somewhere between 20 to 15, I would say it is a high risk. And if it is falling somewhere from 15 to 10, I would say it is a medium risk. And if it is between 10 to 5, I would say it is a low risk. And if it is falling somewhere between 0 to 5, I would say it is a very low risk. So in this way, you will have to define the priority of your risk. Here in my case, my risk was under 12, so I would say it is a medium risk. Okay, and depends, where this database is stored. It also depends on the sensitivity of the information that this database holds. So in my case, it is 12 and it is a medium risk. That way, this is just an example. Now, this is how you assess your risk based on the likelihood, the impact. You give a priority to your risk, and based on the priority, then you take further steps. Like if you find that it is a critical risk, then you will give a different treatment to it. We will come to the next stage, which is the risk treatment, where we treat the risk based on the priority of the risk. The next stage is risk treatment. Risk treatment is all about how you exactly treat or handle the risk. There are 4 different ways to treat a risk. I call it as MATA in short so that you can remember it. First is called mitigate. Second is called accept. Third is called transfer. And fourth is called avoid. Now, it is whenever you identify that there is a risk in your organization, for example, in my previous example where we had a database which had a weak password, I have to implement strong implement strong password policy, okay, on this database. And then what I could do, I could make sure that I install a MFA also so that I can secure the database. By doing this, what exactly I'm doing, I'm treating the risk. So when I provide a solution for those risks, so that when I implement any controls on that risk, then that is called mitigating a risk. Whenever you provide any extra controls so that you can reduce the impact of the risk, it is called mitigating the risk. For example, you put a DLP solution or you implement a firewall rule, any controls that you implement in order to reduce the impact of the risk is called mitigating a risk. Next is accept. What is accepting the risk? Say sometimes, okay, in my same example, if I notice that database which we have does not have any critical information. So even if it is getting exploited, it doesn't make any much difference because it has only public information in that database. So what I would do, I would just say, I'm going to accept it. I understand it has a weak password, but since it is not going to cause any much danger to my organization, implementing a control like MFA or maybe a DLP solution or maybe a firewall, whatever, implementing a control or implementing a strong policy password will actually incur money, right? I'll have to spend so much of time and effort and money to implement these controls. So as a manager, I would say, I understand that it has a weak password, but I'm okay. I'm ready to accept this risk because this database does not contain any critical information. It contains only public information. So in that scenario, you are accepting the risk. Times the impact of the risk will be very huge, and spending so much of money just to implement the control would not be the right solution. In that case, what we do is we shift the risk to someone else, like we tend to buy a cyber insurance so that the cyber insurance team would pay back us the money in case of any uh, of if in case the risk has been substantial. For example, I have my data center, and this data center, say I have a data center, and this data center is in a location where it is very, very rarely hit by earthquakes. So since it is very rare, moving this data center to another location would not be a solution. So in that case, what I would do is I would buy an insurance, because setting up a new data center in a new place will incur so much of cost. In that case, what I would do, a cyber insurance, just in case this risk gets substantialized, my amount will be paid by the insurance company. So this is called the transfer of risk. Next is avoidance of risk. One example of risk avoidance would be like, say your employees are getting their own device to work. Now you understand that implementing controls on bring your own device is huge. So you just say, okay, from tomorrow onwards, we are not allowing employees to bring their own devices for work. In that case, what you're doing is you're not mitigating the risk, but yes, you're completely avoiding the risk. You're just eliminating the activity which introduces the risk. This is called risk avoidance. So once you understand what is the kind of treatment that you would give to your risk, either it is mitigate, accept, transfer, or avoid, depending on whatever treatment you decide based on your organizational decision and based on the criticality of the risk, the decision that you take, it's called treating the risk. So once the risk is treated, now we move to monitoring the risk. See, once you have identified the risk, you have mitigated the risk, why it is important to monitor the risk? Because risks don't stay still. Threats evolve, attackers also evolve, they adapt, the business changes, your priorities will change, your business requirement will change. So it's important for you to monitor the risk. For example, the same example, right? The database in which you had all the customer information. Okay, here you had all the customer information, but now your organization decides to move this database to cloud. In that case, this on-prem database, whatever risk you had here, maybe it's been already taken care by the cloud. So your business is evolving, it is changing, it is adapting. In the same way, the threat actors are also evolving and adapting. Hence, it is very important for you to constantly monitor your risk and say, okay, what is the status of this risk? You have to do regular audits, or maybe you have to have regular meetups. Maybe you have to have a quarterly meetup with the risk owners to see whether if it is still existing or whether it is still applicable to the organization. keeping track of the new threats in the environment. Maybe that risk is not applicable, but a new threat has evolved and a new risk has been identified. The next step is to communicate. It is very important to communicate the identified risk to your management, to your business stakeholders, to your management and your business stakeholders, to communicate the identified risks and share the findings. Okay, just give them an important, just communicate what are the mitigation steps that you have taken, how you have treated the risk. It is very important for you to register the risk in the risk register and refine your strategy. Communicate the same to your management and to your stakeholders so that even they are aware of what are the risks that are currently existing in the environment. The next is improve. The next is improve. It refers to the continuous improvement of your risk management process, making your risk management framework better over time through lessons learned, feedback, audits, and evolving controls. It could be past incidents, it could be your audits, your monitoring, security monitoring results, whatever. Okay, you also need to make sure that your risk life cycle is improving with the changing technology. Now let us look at a real life example. This is called the risk register. Every organization maintains this risk register. So during the audit, the auditors will ask your organization to show the risk register. So what is a risk register? It is a table which contains all the risks that are identified by your organization. So this is how it looks like. It will have the asset on which you see the risk. What is the threat? What is the vulnerability? What is the risk description? You should also give a brief description to your risk. For example, here in let's take this, okay, risk number 2, which is a delivery mobile app. Now, on a delivery mobile app, we are having a risk. What is the risk? The app becomes unavailable due to DOS attack. So what is the vulnerability? We do not have a traffic filtering feature enabled there. And what is the threat? DOS is the threat. So they have given 4 is the impact and the likelihood is 3. So their risk score is 12. Now here in this chapter, in this table, they have not, I'm not showing you whether what is the criticality, whether it is a high criticality, low criticality, but in organization you will have a score and then you will have a table somewhere in the next sheet where it will give you the rating of, okay, if it is falling between so much to so much, then it is high, medium, critical, low. Remember the table that I showed you previously? So they'll have based on the risk score, you will give a priority to the risk depending on the risk score, and then you will also have to give a brief description about the existing control. Web application firewall is there, but what are the mitigation steps? What are the see here for this risk? They are treating the risk. What they are treating? They are implementing rate limiting and DOS protection. So these are the risk treatment plan that they have given. They have mentioned here. And then who's the owner? So every risk must have a owner. Risk should not be lying just like that. You have to assign an owner to whatever risks that you are identifying. So if it is mitigated, just say mitigated or just say closed. If it is not closed, closed means maybe they have mitigated it. If it is not closed, then it will be open, or it is in pending. Where it is, if you're still in the implementation stage, you can just say put it as pending, and then you can put the name of the person on with whom it is pending to as well. So this is a high level overview of how a risk register looks in an organization. That's all for this video. That's all for this clause 6 part 1 video, where I have explained what exactly the risk is and how it is being handled in an organization. In the clause 6 part 2 video, I will be explaining more about the clause 6 requirements and what are the documents which are required to satisfy clause 6. So stay tuned. Thank you.